Chances are, if you're a fan of anime, you're likely a fan of at least one of the countless series that began their serialization in Japanese publisher Shueisha's best-selling manga magazine, Weekly Shonen Jump. Jump has been at the forefront of global anime consumption for decades, and despite its common associations with action manga, has managed to develop many best-selling series across a wide variety of genres and appeal to a fairly broad audience in spite of its singular intended demographic. But in spite of its widespread appeal in some areas and its constant evolving as a brand, it is still a magazine that has made incredulously minimal progress in its portrayal of members of the LGBT community, despite the plethora of queer people that readily consume and make derivative works of its IP. However, there once was a time in Shonen Jump's history when the magazine's first major gay couple was on the precipice of being introduced, yet ultimately had its coming out cancelled and its potential prevented from making history. But against all odds, the creatives who championed it didn't go down without a fight. Today, we will dig into Shonen Jump's dark past and reveal the truth behind one of its less popular but still acclaimed series, as we piece together the clues to finally uncover. Having a hit series in Weekly Shonen Jump has solidified the consecutive successes of many an acclaimed mangaka as long as their name isn't Masashi Kishimoto. One of the most successful authors to ever publish in Jump, having not 2 but 3 consecutive hits in a row, is the mangaka behind the currently publishing supernatural rom-com Witch Watch, a chaotic comedic genius named Kenta Shinohara. Shinohara's roots in Jump harken back to when he was an assistant to Hideaki Sarachi on Gintama, and prior to Witch Watch's debut in 2021, Shinohara penned the award-winning sci-fi mystery series Astra Lost in Space from 2016 to 2017. Now, Astra is not where this story begins. Our story actually begins further back, but in order for us to go back, we must first go forward in retrospect. So actually, we still have to go back, but a little less back. Astra Lost in Space follows a group of students who, in the midst of their interplanetary camping trip, become stranded on an abandoned spaceship they name the Astra. The group of strangers then band together to form a ragtag crew and find their way home, unveiling the cause of their displacement, the hidden history of their world, and the secrets of their own intertwined origins along the way. Now, while Astra is a fairly celebrated series for its story alone, one of its most notable aspects is the inclusion and exploration of the character Luca, who is revealed to be intersex halfway through the story. As I mentioned, Jump is not a brand known for its well-received handling of members of the LGBTQIA+ community outside select outliers. So the inclusion, identification, and acceptance of Luca as an intersex boy in and of itself was a groundbreaking moment within the Jump brand for the community. Now, to be completely transparent, Astra indeed is a Shonen Jump manga, however, it did not publish within the pages of Weekly Shonen Jump. Instead, it was serialized on Jump's digital sister publication, Shonen Jump Plus. Jump Plus, which is surprisingly not a streaming service, and even more surprisingly the home of the Cheerdanchi manga, Random But Go Fight Win, has proven itself to be much more open to portray LGBT characters and same-gender relationships with much more favorable reaction in comparison to the main Weekly Jump magazine. From the trans and sapphic characters in the works of Tatsuki Fujimoto, to the boys who like boys of Ao no Flag, and especially the full LGBT acronym being represented in the passionate pages of my accidental all-time favorite, 2.5 Dimensional Seduction. So it's no wonder why Astra was able to go the lengths it did within the scope of a publication who fairly regularly features the various colors of the rainbow. Although looking back, it may have actually been one of the first to pave the way for creative freedom to include non-cisgender and or non-heterosexual characters for the countless series that have done so after it. Ultimately, Luca's existence shows that Shinohara has had an inclination to portray LGBT characters, and while Wichiwachi hasn't followed through on canon anything for anyone just yet, leaving the future undetermined and unknown, it can't be understated that a key difference between this uncertain present and the representation-filled past is the difference in the publication for each of Shinohara's series published in the Reiwa era. However, Shinohara had another award-winning work before Astra that was published in the main Weekly Shonen Jump magazine in the mid-2000s to mid-2010s, right before the advent of Shonen Jump Plus. Published from 2007 to 2013, Sket Dance was Kenta Shinohara's breakout hit in Weekly Shonen Jump. Spanning 288 chapters, the manga published alongside several other successful contemporaries, including its bastard stepfather Gintama, and of course during the height of the Big Three, One Piece, Naruto, and Bleach. In a similar vein to its successor Astra, Sket Dance received the 55th Shogakukan Manga Award in the Shonen Manga category in 2009, an accolade achieved in years prior by fellow Jump titles like Slam Dunk, Bleach, and Yu Yu Hakusho. The story of Sket Dance, that's Sket not despite what the first opening implies several times, follows the Sketodan, a student support club at Kaimei Gakuen, as they help their fellow students, teachers, and complete strangers with any and all issues, problems, and dilemmas they may be dealing with for free. The club members consist of leader Bosun, an insecure, immature boy with a heart of gold and concentration powers that make Adderall look like a placebo, Himiko, an Osakan former legendary delinquent by the name of Onihime and the voice of reason to her often foolish clubmates, only sometimes though, and lastly Suichi, a popular Ikemen otaku who only communicates by the text-to-speech feature on his laptop and has more information on anyone and everyone 911, then the FBI. The trio has a massive revolving recurring cast of tropetacular classmates, but their most notable rivals are Kaime's student council consisting of Treasurer Mad Money Mimorin, Secretary DOS Daisy, General Affairs Man Michiru, VP Serious Tsundere Tsubaki, and President Agitator Agata. There's laughs, there's tears, there's trauma, there's overcoming fears. There's empathy on a level emotionally impossible for real-life people. There's countless almost shots of Bosun's auto zone.
お父さん、アウトゾーンって何？
ああ、チンコのことだ。
And most importantly, behind all the empathy and teases of Bosun's
Chinko.
there was a romance subplot building between two of its most popular male characters. Heavy anime and manga spoilers for Sket Dance going forward, because after the longest setup ever, this is a story of the beginning and the tragic end of Jump's almost first gay couple. 5 episodes into the Sket Dance anime is where this story begins, when the vice principal of the student council barges into the Sketodan's room and commits a war crime by indirectly knocking over The two's heated rivalry is established when they compete to see who will put on a better show for the local kindergarten, with both Bosun and Tsubaki acknowledging each other's charm points throughout the process. Their path as rivals then evolves further throughout the course of their next two competitions, the Biba Gay Battle and Kaime Rock Festival, both events being something neither boy was interested in until learning of the other's participation, as on Tsubaki's side of things, his fellow student council members begin to visibly notice his interest in Bosun, which he vehemently and unconvincingly denies. It is also during Kaime Rock Fest when Bosun's later disinterest in the two competing due to a separate event leaves Tsubaki feeling confused, ignored, and jealous, as Bosun implies his desire to perform for someone else, leaving Tsubaki's not yet understood emotions in turmoil as he grapples with why Bosun ignoring him makes him feel this way. The two's relationship then begins to shift as they find themselves unlikely allies, opening the door to a more cordial acquaintanceship. When the female members of their respective orgs are transformed into the internet's biggest boogeyman,
お兄ちゃん電話何？
the two find themselves on shared babysitting duty and are presented to the viewers as the spitting image of a gay couple out for a walk with their children.
パパたちのようですわ。
But ultimately, the developments reach their pinnacle in Stakeout Blues. After Bosun opens the episode with a monologue about the beauty of flowers, the name Tsubaki of course meaning camellia, his beloved camellia then appears, with the two once again arguing over nothing as an excuse to get so close in each other's face they almost touch tips in the process. The story continues with the two's accidental team-up where a more amicable relationship based on respect is somewhat established. Tsubaki's sexual repression is challenged by the student council by way of a Bosun comparison. Bosun confesses by way of projection.
俺のこと大好きか!
Incompatibility is vocally stated but then visibly disproven, and a brief contest of endurance establishes who's on top. The most notable development during the stakeout, however, is when they share a can of coffee. Did we all see that? Let's play it again. Now, if anime has taught me anything, it's that an indirect kiss is more intimate than a man taking his socks off for At this stage of the story, Shinohara's intentions for Bosun and Tsubaki are clear as day, especially when coupled with the presence of Agata as the interfering romantagonist. Although right when the story of these two seem to be smooth sailing towards setting a new precedent for romantic dynamics coming out of Shonen Jump, the opening song sequence changes to its fourth, Message by the Sketchbook, containing within it a callback to the two spit swapping, followed by somber foreshadowing by way of the falling snow causing Tsubaki to shed a single tear. In 2009, Sket Dance published Bosun's backstory titled Happy Birthday. It tells the story of how Bosun, born Fujisaki Yusuke, came to discover he is adopted on the day he turned 15. Upon learning the truth about his deceased parents, Bosun proceeds to run away from home, encountering the now adult child his father saved on the day he died, who gives Bosun a letter his father wrote to the unborn Bosun stating he hopes Bosun will grow up to be someone who helps people. In the long term, the event is ultimately what inspires Bosun to create the Sketodan, but in the short term influences Bosun to help a nearby person being harassed by some delinquents who, unbeknownst to him, is Tsubaki. While the encounter is significant in how it inspires both boys, ironically due to assorted details, neither of them ever recognizes the other at Kaime all these years later. However, despite this backstory being an added layer to the two's relationship, in actuality, it serves as a setup for the demise of the couple before they could be actualized. Because in the pages of Sket Dance immediately following Happy Birthday was the follow-up story, Happy Re-Birthday. In the present, Bosun meets the doctor who delivered him, who reveals he is actually a twin and has a sibling out in the world, much to Bosun's shock, but the surprises don't stop there, as the doctor elaborates not only that Bosun's twin is a boy, but that Bosun has known him all this time, revealing that Bosun's twin brother, in a shocking twist, is actually
Tsubaki,
meaning the gay couple Kenta Shinohara had always intended is a dynamic of insurmountable spite. Meaning the gay couple Kenta Shinohara always intended was prevented from being canonized by the editorial staff of Weekly Shonen Jump. Things that were once coincidental and a simple symbolism of similarity are cheaply explained away as being a byproduct of biological preconditioned behavior. The indescribable attraction and tension is framed as sibling rivalry. The blushes and fixations excused as familial admiration. The indirect kiss is suddenly a whole lot hotter. Even their names, simple Easter egg references to popular main and side characters from other Jump series, are utilized to spin this Futogo farce. Bosun is Yusuke, Tsubaki is Sasuke, the meaning behind their names intended to symbolize how the two would complement each other. Right and left, older and younger, lax and strict, silly and serious, bottom and top. Rebirthday is aptly titled as it is a rewrite of this series' queer history. It is a retcon utilized to enact queer erasure. A retcon that was mandated at the last minute by higher-ups between the publishing of chapters 87 and 88. In chapter 87, the reveal of Bosun having a twin sibling is met with Bosun saying he has a brother or sister. This would have to be a character who at the very least is in his year, and given the twin association, someone who looks somewhat like him. The reveal in chapter 88 is Tsubaki, but given similar prior context clues, it very well could have been Himeko. Given the nature of her manzai comedy act dynamic with Bosun, along with the fact in the manga the baby does not have Tsubaki's eyelashes, and finally the similarity in appearance to Bosun shown in Himeko's backstory from several dozen chapters before, their relationship is also one that could be explained away as being due to their shared biological origin, and a just as impressive rug pull if Himeko's dyed hair had been a red herring all this time. It's not until chapter 88 that Bosun learns his sibling's gender, that it's someone he knows, and that the doctor is that person's adopted father. Facts that the doctor could have led with in the chapter before, but instead are shoehorned into the beginning of the next. Facts that were clearly thrown in on behalf of editorial interference, all the more egregious since the setup for Bosun and Tsubaki before this couldn't have been more obvious. So obvious, the doctor breaks the fourth wall, apologizing to the audience for his participation as a messenger of this unforgivable alteration. But the deed is done, the canon altered, the couple killed. The story carries on with the now twins confronting each other and the truth, asking, Bosun copes by telling himself their tension was because they resembled each other. Tsubaki somberly mourns Bosun's proposal that there be no changes to their status quo, and Jump Editorial sigh in relief at having prevented a major change to their own. But after the two wish each other a happy birthday and Bosun walks away from Tsubaki literally and romantically, he cries. Cries over the loss of the boy he loved. Cries over the prevention of a groundbreaking moment in Shonen Jump history. Cries on behalf of Shinohara and the audience's expectations. But after he cries and thinks about what he's been through, he laughs. Because Twincest is Wincest! Because he is Bosun and this is nowhere near the end. Signaled by the color choice for the Sket Dance logo on the next volume, the fight had only begun. At the opening of the Sketodan's second year at Kaimei is the introduction of the emotionally exhausting typhoon known as Agata Saya, the busty, aggressively tsundere younger sister of the student council president, Agata Sojiro. Saya goes on to become practically the fourth unofficial member of the Sketodan, not only due to her constantly hanging out with them, not that she wants to or anything, but also because it's established fairly quickly that she has a crush on Bosun, not that she admit that or anything. Saya is a confusing canon-altering conundrum on several fronts. She is established to be in the same year as the Sketodan and has been at the school this entire time. This is fairly easy to accept since the Sketodan meet other students from all grades for the first time, all the time. What's odd, however, is that she is not only Agata's sister that nobody has brought up until now when the two clearly aren't trying to hide it, but also revealed to be classmates and friends with one of the Sketodan's closest friends, Captain. So she's in the same year as them, she's apparently been at school with them the whole time, she's friends with their friends, but they've never met. She's a tsundere, pigtails, imoto, okina opai. Shoehorned in is an understatement, but Saya's eruption of an entrance signals a clear intentional shift in the setting of Sket Dance post-rebirthday. By shoving every straight otaku's favorite waifu traits into a single character, with meta commentary of this indisputable fact sprinkled in. She could be seen as a recurring tropey character like any of the others who fill out the rest of the cast, but to be made into an unironic love interest is several levels beyond a recurring joke. And it's a decision made more obvious of its marketing intent when it's part of a new love triangle involving herself, Bosun, and Himeko, but more on that much later. While Saya is clear waifu bait and part of this jarring sudden attempt to make every nearby girl fall in love with Bosun, even in the face of Saya, Shinohara's Yususasu Sabisu continues as a rebellion to the editorial interference. With Saya's tsundere personality ironically and retroactively confirming the prior intended mutual attraction of Bosun and Tsubaki since the dynamic response and dialogue is identical, and the addition of an untapped dimension to the story, making the relationship between the now brothers a stimulating sought-out occurrence by everyone around them. In simple terms, they ship them. Immediately after the revelation and morning of Rebirthday when Bosun and Tsubaki encounter each other, Bosun's clubmates emphatically encourage the two to shake hands for the voyeur's personal pleasure. In Happy to Meet You, the now twins have a team-up covertly orchestrated by their respective orgs in order to coerce the two to interact for their viewing pleasure. Even Saya, despite being a plot device to force Bosun into boobs, finds herself amused and intrigued by their relationship at another time. And now all too recurring response to which an exasperated Tsubaki asks, Bosun and Tsubaki are further pandered to the audience when they have their first dinner together. A scenario that plays out as a simulation of a couple's first time meeting the family, full of awkward interactions, blushing, and even a first time calling each other by their first names. Not to mention, when Agata Agata comes to incorrectly assume Saya and Tsubaki are a couple, his unclear conversation with Tsubaki on the matter causes him to unintentionally probe Tsubaki about his relationship with Bosun. As Tsubaki expresses his struggle to accept the boy he liked is now his brother, but admits regardless the relationship is still special to him. To which Agata presses Tsubaki, when coupled with an earlier tongue-in-cheek statement by Himiko prior to the very first attempted handshake, it can be understood that the words literally spoken by the cast for the sake of furthering Jump's intended perception of the brothers, and the actions which complement these words are not on the same page, and portray the cast having a much different perspective on the nature of the relationship between these brother-boyfriends. And portray the cast having a much different perspective on the original nature of the relationship in comparison to what the audience has been told. In turn, a retroactive confirmation of the original narrative intent for the two to be lovers. An intent yet again confirmed in a blink and miss moment at the tail end of the twins' visit to Tsubaki's rich fellow Stuko member Unyu's household. The story wraps up in the rain, Bosun and Tsubaki freaking out over context that doesn't matter, but performing several actions in order that do. Hand-holding, going to hug, heart arms, Now, transparency is key when it comes to this moment. It does not benefit this story to tell a lie. The kiss you have just witnessed, I must admit, is in fact anime only. But its importance still holds because it's not only Shinohara who at this stage of things had been subliminally confirming his intended narrative truth all along, it was also the anime studio who so passionately carried on Shinohara's vision of Yusuke to Sasuke in spite of insurmountable editorial interference, and even long before. Sketch Dance's anime adaptation aired for 77 episodes from 2011 to 2012 with a bonus OVA released in 2013. By the time the anime had been announced in production in October 2010, the studio would have had access to at least the first 15 volumes of the manga at the bare minimum up to chapter 135. This means they would have been able to see the rise and then fall of Yusuke to Sasuke in its entirety, along with the jarring narrative pivot of the Bosun Himiko Saya love triangle, all the way through the first half of that love triangle's biggest development in the story's school trip rhapsody, which we will discuss in the next part of this video. However, despite all this and even supplementing Rebirth's rewrite by adding Tsubaki's eyelashes to the anime's flashback baby, the studio provided additional Yususasu Sabisu both after and before the tragic retcon of Rebirth Day, standing in solidarity with Shinohara's intended vision, like in the already mentioned lolly sitting episode where Tsubaki is not even present in that story in the manga. In the time after Rebirth Day, scenes where the two blush are added in excess when otherwise non-existent in the source. From an interrogation into his Onisan interest to being teased by Onisan as a tsundere, a dinner date invitation out of nowhere, awkwardly thanking Bosun for his help, even touching butts in the 8th ending song sequence. And they're not the only ones with added anime-only blush, as Himiko is filled with the passionate excitement of 10,000 Fujoshi suns, when her reaction was neutral in the same story on paper. Even in the aftermath of Agata's Saya Tsubaki misconception, a brief argument in the manga is turned into another blush-filled soon amicable interaction, with Himiko and Suichi reacting in the only appropriate way to the brothers' shared awkward cordiality, and the brothers in turn breaking the fourth wall, asking at this point the most rhetorical of questions. But the most notable creative liberty, signaling a support of Shinohara's vision of Yusuke to Sasuke, is in the 5th opening sequence reboot, which ends with a shot of Bosun sending a photo to Tsubaki. That photo being of a rainbow. If that ain't code, I don't know what is. However, while the production should be applauded for their commitment to supporting Shinohara's suppressed vision for a gay Shonen Jump couple, even when it had been shut down by the editors at Jump, a sudden drastic change within the same opening sequence several episodes later indicated a direct response from the higher-ups, and signaled the beginning of the abrupt end of the Sketch Dance anime. In episode 62, Reboot's final scene is suddenly itself rebooted with the person standing behind Bosun changing from Tsubaki to Saya, and the rainbow in the shared photo moved out of frame in favor of a close-up of the owl Hosuke, indicating a halt to the anime's fight for visibility for Yusuke to Sasuke, and the start of the tangible effects of Jump Editorial's heavy-handed rebranding of the Sketch Dance manga to match the traditional sensibilities of Weekly Shonen Jump. Story-wise, this would also be the full start of the Sketch Dance story arc School Trip Rhapsody, which covers the Sketodan's class trip to a ski lodge where Bosun and Himiko switch bodies by accident on the way. But the most notable development in School Trip Rhapsody is its settling into the ongoing love triangle between Bosun, Himiko, and Saya, solidifying the seriousness of the interwoven feelings held between these three characters. The tone shift on its own is a notable difference in the atmosphere of the story, but what's more notable is Suichi's direct participation in influencing Saya to ask Bosun how he feels about Himiko. When in prior instances in the story, when he's been asked about the two's relationship, he hammered home that their relationship is vague, complicated, and not necessarily romantic. When asked directly in School Trip Rhapsody, Bosun states he has no romantic interest in Himiko. At least he's not thought about it until that moment. moment. Even though around 20 episodes before in the story Embarrassed Girl, Bosun was presented with this idea and laughed off its possibility. But Bosun and Himiko aren't the only major heterosexual romance suddenly shoved to the forefront of the narrative's priorities. The first is between Suichi and former delinquent but now popular voice actor and idol Momoka. The second is between fellow student council members Tsubaki and Daisy in the story of the same name. The second coupling, however, drastically backfires and quickly becomes backpedaled. Since understandably Sket Dance fans reacted very negatively to the sexist and demeaning portrayal of Daisy, one of the notably strongest female characters in the story, as being so helpless she can't even open a jar. How dare you try to domesticate DOS Dami? After this spectacular failure to secure a female love interest for Tsubaki, he is sidelined from the main plot of School Trip Rhapsody in order to protect the Bosun Himiko Saya love triangle's developments, being hypnotized into thinking he's a cat in the meantime. However, in true Shinohara fashion, Neko Mimi Tsubaki in and of itself is a subversion of this narrative mandate. Because unbeknownst to Jump Editorial, who wouldn't know otherwise, the Japanese word for cat neko, in another way of spelling, is Japanese slang for bottom. As we all know, every neko needs a tachi, and if you remember, Tsubaki already had a backup to whom he could back that ass up in the form of Agata. But alas, Jump, understanding this established potential for a backup gay couple, swiftly puts an end to this potential rebound dynamic. First by establishing Agata's overprotective obsession with his sister Saya, and secondly by retiring Agata from the student council president position, relegating him to only really be seen for developments involving Saya. However, a retirement of 2 student council members means an opportunity to introduce 2 more. And aside from Shinohara using this opportunity to make his mark on history by introducing the prototype for what would eventually inspire Gotobun, it is where he makes his move to introduce Tsubaki's replacement love interest in the form of modern ninja, Kiri Kato. While the two start off on a fairly bad note, as Kato says he refuses to listen to Tsubaki, after Tsubaki shows his unwillingness to give up on him when Kato attempts to punish an abusive teacher, in a shocking plot twist, Kato goes from Tsubaki's rival to his retainer.
Oyakata-sama! Yukimuro! Oyakata-sama! Yukimuro! Oyakata-sama! Yukimuro!
Saying he will serve Aruji Sasuke-sama in this Kohai Senpai subordinate boss, younger semi-older uke relationship in flesh and blood. And the pairing pays off, as history shows it is Katobaki Dojinshi that comes to be the most plethorous, usurping both Agatsu and Yususasu Dojinshi in overall number despite being the last to debut. The two's pairing is also very much helped by its visual similarity to the ever-popular pairing of Kaoru and Shinji. An intentional decision on Shinohara's part, hoping that the higher-ups at Jump would be more willing to allow this coupling, firstly because he had obliged with giving Bosun 2 female love interests and no longer involved the series' main character, and secondly since it evokes a pairing from one of the most successful IP of all time, meaning the risk of deterring their consumer base was much lower. Harkening back to Rebirth Day, revealing the re in fact did not stand for rewrite, but for rebuild. Rebuild of Evangelion. Do you think it's a coincidence that 1.0 debuted in the same year as the Sket Dance manga? That 2.0 released in the same year the manga won the Shogakukan Award? That 3.0 aired in the same year the Sket Dance anime ended? Or that the final film released in the year the Sket Dance anime's 10th anniversary was celebrated? Could this all just be a convenient coincidence, or could that piano scene be a metaphor for sex? However, in spite of the mass fan appeal of Kaoru Kato, Tsubaki Shinji, and the it provided, the timing of these two's union in the anime unfortunately ended up being the catalyst for its cancellation. On September 20th, 2012, the 76th episode of Sket Dance aired, with Suichi breaking the fourth wall, saying this is the second to last episode, announcing the anime's sudden cancellation. The announcement came as a shock, especially since the anime had in no way caught up to the current chapters of the manga, in total adapting about 160 chapters of a manga that at this point had published over 220. Despite teasing them 11 episodes earlier in the final opening song sequence, Kato and fellow new Stuco member Usami had only just been introduced properly 4 episodes before. Not to mention the events of the manga around the same time had the cast of Sket Dance well into the start of their 3rd year, so if the production wanted a more definitive place to end, they could have continued adapting up until Agata's class's graduation in chapter 205, neatly sending off a generation of the cast. However, the anime decided to halt production with a final episode containing mostly anime-only content, the only manga content adapted being Saya decisively confronting Bosun to tell him how she feels, except as usual when she goes to do so.
Bosun. 好きだよ.
Wait, what? She actually did it? You're not supposed to do that, you're a tsundere! As for why the anime was cancelled and with such a strange final episode, we can assume based on timing that the reason lies within the creative choices for the 3rd to last episode, Solitude. A story that occurs 20 chapters after Kato's introduction in the manga, but in the anime occurs only 3 episodes later, cutting down his and Tsubaki's antagonistic relationship in favor of presenting the rival to retainer transition to the public much sooner. Once again, the anime production took measures into their own hands to make sure the public could see Shinohara's vision as soon as possible. But for this situation, they had 2 good data-based reasons to take action. By this time, Kato Tsubaki Dojinshi had already proliferated to the point of matching the number of existing Agata Tsubaki Dojinshi despite being a younger ship. And in just a few months' time, the 3rd rebuild of Evangelion film was slated to hit theaters with promised Kaoshin content whose renewed attention would directly benefit any and all fan interest in Kirisasu due to the aesthetic similarity. Not realizing that the studio would once again side with Shinohara after having been reprimanded once already, and recognizing themselves that Sket Dance's own 3rd impact could be upon them, those in power decided it was time to abruptly bring the anime to an end. Around the time time the anime ended, in the manga, Shinohara had been in the throes of further developing the editorial-mandated love triangle between Bosun, Himiko, and Saya, with insistence by outside parties in story that Bosun and Himiko like each other and just don't realize it. Ultimately, a decision is made to ice out Saya and go full steam ahead with Himiko, but why did a decision have to be made at all? While fairly uncommon, it is not unheard of for Jump manga to end without the main character in a relationship. In fact, several of Sketch Dance's peers took this route in their respective ends. No spoilers for who. Ultimately, the key difference lies in the fact Sketch Dance, in comparison, is an award-winning manga, thus the pressure to conform to Jump values from higher-ups being that much stronger due to its representing the Jump brand at a more scrutinized level. Not strong enough, however, because despite pressure from above demanding Shinohara conform to their rigid romance expectations, after having his vision for representation shot down twice, the man, the myth, the legend responded in kind by giving the publisher what they demanded, but in a way even they weren't prepared for. Chapter 191 of Sketch Dance, titled Harmless Fruit, is anything but, as it is the introduction of fan-favorite femboy and Miharu Kiryu prototype Minoru Sakura, also known by the nickname Cherry. To put it so lightly, it almost sounds like a lie. Despite his cute boyish appearance, Cherry in actuality is a raging pervert. A pervert of such incomprehensibly gap moe power, his presence summons fellow agent of chaos, the fourth wall shattering wannabe shoujo mangaka, Saotome Roman, who blows the whistle on Cherry being an editor-mandated inclusion and highlighting how stark of a contrast Cherry's existence is to the pre-existing tone of Sketch Dance up until this point. Honestly, my not bringing Roman up until this late in the game and not explaining her significance in detail is the most Roman thing I could do in this video. More on her later. Knowing pervert characters are an often controversial concept in any given story, Shinohara continues to self-sabotage out of spite by utilizing Cherry fairly often, including when Sketch Dance gets a rare cover issue of Weekly Jump. While for the most part Bosun and Tsubaki, the originally intended couple, maintain platonic interactions for the rest of the course of the manga, Shinohara still manages to slip in some final Yususasu Sabisu, paired together for the three-legged race, when pairings are otherwise supposed to be boy-girl, wanting to be called Oni-chan, and then doing so by way of a Freudian slip, and most notably in Inherit the Twin Stars, where they awkwardly agree to start calling each other by their first names. An event that 189 chapters earlier in a different world could have been the start of a beautiful relationship, but in this reality acts as the portrayal of an amicable but somber spiritual breakup. At this point, Shinohara's creative vision had been shot down more times than Shinzo. He had been mandated from above to continually fall in line with the rigid guidelines for what Jump manga must present and contain, and his continued cold war with editorial had led to him making creative decisions out of spite, even though objectively, Cherry is the GOAT. Realizing after 5 years of publication his desire for Sketch Dance to end had finally begun, Shinohara transitioned the characters into their third year, uniting the majority of the cast into the same homeroom for their final year together. Taking his own advice from Agata's graduation speech to regret nothing, move forward and never look back, Shinohara arrived at the starting line for the end of the story of Sketch Dance, maintaining his integrity, inspired to give it one final push, and refusing to give up on the kind of story he set out to tell from the very start. 78 chapters before the final publication of Sketch Dance and Weekly Shonen Jump, Kenta Shinohara began laying the groundwork for the final arc of his first successful manga, taking the time he had left to make sure he would get across the core messages he wanted to tell within the story all along, including finally sharing the origin of the Sketodan in the long-anticipated story Switch On, as well as sharing his values as a mangaka in the chapter where the aforementioned fellow award-winning Saotome Roman argues with her new rival Mika Amanashi, the latter who echoes the Jump criteria that good manga requires good art, unpredictable plot, and freshness, condemning Roman's manga for not adhering to these simple qualifications, but Roman responds on behalf of Shinohara, asking bluntly, "Are you not entertained?" And if nothing else, Shinohara sure knows how to entertain, as he rounded out the manga with the final story arc, appropriately named after the iconic Donna Summer song. Let's dance. Last Dance presents a class-wide final conflict for the Sketodan and their classmates in Class 3C, as a new board director for the school named Ryusei Ichimaru was introduced, and mandates stricter rules at Kaimei, starting with the cancellation of the highly anticipated school festival. Bosun attempts to appeal to Ryusei, learning he has a son named Yuki, who, similar to Suichi, will not speak because of bullying he's experienced due to his standing out in school. Ryusei says his desire to eliminate individuality at Kaimei stems from his belief that if everyone conforms and nobody stands out, then there will be no bullying, to which Bosun uses Suichi's popularity as a counterexample and says he'll prove being different isn't a bad thing at the school festival. Ryusei agrees to reinstate the festival, but gives Bosun in 3C the ultimatum that Yuki will be the judge of that, and if he doesn't speak by the end of the festival, then Bosun will be expelled. The class ultimately decide to put on a walk rally, with Yuki coming to visit and observe while Suichi begins to get to know the boy, and Bosun attempts to figure out why the boy won't speak. The day of the festival arrives with Yuki participating in the activity and enjoying himself throughout, but by the end, he still does not speak. Bosun, however, reveals he knows Yuki's secret, revealing that Yuki is a transgender boy. 285 chapters into Sketch Dance, after having his first two attempts to portray LGBT characters character's silence, the third attempt makes himself heard by way of finally finding his voice. There is no confirmation as for why Shinohara was allowed to depict an LGBT character, so we can only speculate. But during the time Sketch Dance was in the process of ending, Weekly Shonen Jump was in the midst of yet another generational shift in its publication. Several of Sketch Dance's contemporaries had completed or were in the process of winding down, future hits were set to debut fairly soon if they hadn't already, and many of those future series would eventually go on to win the same accolades Sketch Dance had done in the years before. On top of it all, in comparison to Bosun and Tsubaki, or even Agata and Kato, Yuki was a tertiary character, one designed to solely appear in the final arc. And some one-off trans character was not something Jump would at the time, in the past, or in the future, ever see as a concern. But again, in regards to the exact reason, we may never know. What we do know, however, is that Yuki's story is utilized as a final dialogue between Shinohara and Jump Editorial, who take the form of Yuki's father Yusei. The latter presented as the cautious editorial office, expressing their care for their creatives and that the suppression of their individuality is for their own protection. But from Shinohara's perspective, represented by the ever-empathetic Bosun, while their intention in theory was to protect someone from bullying, in turn their suppression of individuality was ironically a form of what those bullies had intended to achieve in the first place, emphasizing the importance of accepting people for who they are, and as stated in a prior chapter, all for the sake of future generations. Sketch Dance wraps up with the Sketodan's class graduation, and Suichi also finally being able to find his voice, giving a graduation speech to his peers, a speech one can easily interpret as being dedicated in part to those in the anime production who supported his vision best they could until the end. But even after finally achieving a version of what he sought out to do, Shinohara takes advantage of the lack of Jump policing to tie up the series' final lingering plot thread. As we've covered, Bosun and Himiko's romance had been an editorial mandated creative choice initiated in the aftermath of Happy Rebirth Day. And in the final 11 chapters of Sketch Dance, after will they won't theying for seemingly ever, Himiko is confronted with her feelings for Bosun when the cast around her gaslights her into believing she's liked him all along. However, as Himiko bids goodbye to Bosun as he travels to America after graduation, when she tells Bosun, "I love you," in true Han Solo fashion, he responds, "I know," leaving Himiko flustered and so happy the man she loves reciprocates. Until he reveals he also loves Suichi and Captain and f***ing everybody. And thus, Sketch Dance ends with Bosun flying away, completely unaware of what Himiko meant.
いつも迷惑ばかりかけるけど
As we covered in the beginning, after Sketch Dance finished publication, Kenta Shinohara went on to helm two successful back-to-back series, the award-winning Kanata no Astra and the award-nominated Witch Watch. But for a portion of the fanbase, the lingering indefinite end of the Bosun-Himiko romance subplot in Sketch Dance was something some of them could never get over. And in 2019, one fan in particular harassed Shinohara for a return of the series for the sake of Himiko, to which Shinohara on rare occasion actually responded, in the vaguest, most Shinohara way possible, and with his response shared an image from the paperback edition of the manga depicting an older Sketodan. The most notable aspect of the image that fans' eyes were immediately drawn to is the fact that both Bosun and Himiko are wearing rings on their ring fingers. Some fans rejoiced at the idea of their long-desired coupling coming to fruition, but failed to notice the message displayed on Bosun's shirt, "Nobody knows the future." A fascinating phrase to choose for said shirt, since in the same year a few months later, Shinohara announced that he would be deleting his Twitter account, citing his personal struggles with the size of his following and a desire to focus on making manga. And focus on manga he did, as in 2021, 2 years later, he returned to the main weekly Shonen Jump magazine and began publishing Witch Watch. However, 2 years after that in 2023, at the tail end of chapter 94, Witch Watch character Kanchi encounters a woman at a wedding who congratulates him on Witch Watch's 2nd anniversary. That woman is revealed to be an adult Saotome Roman, with countless Sketch Dance characters retroactively revealed as having been among those in attendance. Roman then runs out to greet an adult Himiko, signaling the start of the Witch Watch Sketch Dance crossover, Duet Dance. In it, a mysterious code appears on Asunara High School's banners when Himiko comes to substitute teach, calling on Bosun, who helps her solve the mystery for the Witch Watch cast. Suichi pops in on Bosun along the way, and the Sketodan are reunited in their adult lives. While the crossover is a touching and entertaining revisit of Sketch Dance's core cast, in relation to the ring art Shinohara posted to Twitter, there is not a single ring to be seen on anybody's hand, either hand, in the 2.5 chapters of this crossover. When Himiko first meets the students and they ask if she's married, she implies a he who hasn't proposed yet, but she never specifies. It is also mentioned in conversation between Bosun and Himiko that they have seen each other and ate together the day before. But friends do that all the time, and as we know, it wasn't for dinner, because Himiko had dinner with Sketch Dance's Sadako, Yuki Reiko, along with Morihito and Nico the day before as well. Could this simply be chronologically before a later proposal in the ring art being of the trio further in the future? Could this retroactively reveal Shinohara only made that image for shallow fan service and sent it to the fan in order to shut him and other whiny fans up? Could the rings in question in Himiko's reference to a he mean the two will both get married to someone, but not each other? Could Himiko still be delusionally waiting for Bosun to reciprocate her feelings all these years later, even though Bosun ran off to America to be with an older white man? You see, I might have skipped over a teensy detail in my summarizing of Sketch Dance. A detail by the name of Ryan. Back in chapter 269, titled Document Adherence of Solo Bicycle, Bosun is coerced into participating in a cross-country solo bike trip by the head of the broadcasting club Yagi, who wants to record him for a documentary. Over the course of his trip, Bosun meets a blonde bohemian biker by the name of Ryan. Ikemen bandit Keith here is a world-traveling American who comes to Bosun's aid when his belongings are stolen mid-trip. Through the course of this story, a sudden change occurs within Bosun, seeing as before he met Ryan, he was ready to give up, but afterwards Bosun has a maturity about him which invigorates him to continue the trip. The catalyst for this change occurring after Yagi calls it a day and heads to stay at a nearby hotel, and Bosun spends the night with Ryan in his tent. It could be said that Bosun's change in demeanor can be attributed to him becoming a man. With Bosun mentioning during the trip the ways spending a night with Ryan inspired him to see the world and that meeting him was big, so big, that in the throes of festival prep and last dance, Bosun is revealed to still be texting Ryan. And prior to graduation, Bosun reveals to Himiko, with a boyish blush, that he's going to Ryan's place. Bosun explains how Ryan opened his eyes to this kind of path, yeah, it's called cruising, and that after graduation he's going to reunite with Ryan in the land of the supersized me, home of the depraved. In the end, Himiko is left alone at the airport, hopelessly waiting for a boy who doesn't love her back. Well, at least not in the same way. All while years later, Bosun is still biking along with his blonde bohemian boyfriend. They're even on a first-name basis, and you know in Japan that's so big! It took him quite an indirect path to get here, but it looks like in the end Shinohara ultimately did achieve what he initially set out to do. I mean, if you want to talk about queer or racial, let's talk about there being no mention of Ryan on the wiki!
I've never felt so satisfied.
And that, everyone, is the story of the rise and fall of Yu Susasu, the gay couple Kenta Shinohara intended back in the pages of Sket Dance, and how Jump Editorial shut them down. As I said, the verdict is still out on whether Wichiwachi will make Shinohara 3 for 3 in a row. All we've gotten so far was that speech about different people coming together are invincible tied to the gang making a rainbow bridge. But it's not 2007 anymore, it's 2025. Kanchi and Miharu could be Nana Shino next week. To anyone casting doubt on the veracity of the claims made in this video, I want you to first question why, unlike Astra and Witchwatch, Sket Dance has never been licensed in English, not physically nor digitally. And secondly, more importantly, would I ever lie to you? Bye!